Welcome to the Mind Vine podcast, where we challenge the stigma associated with mental illness through conversations about a variety of issues impacting mental health. Here we bring you news, views, and interviews that intrigue, educate, and celebrate recovery. Leading us on this journey are the hosts of the Mind Vine podcast, Darryl Mathers and Chris Bovie.
So welcome to the Mind Vine podcast. My name is Darryl Mathers. This is Chris Bovie, my co-host. And we're pleased to have Mike Schratter.
That's right.
Hopefully I got that close to being
did.
right. So thank you very much for being here. And you're here because you started a program that kind of incorporated your own experience with mental health and your interest in riding bikes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, I'm bipolar, and I grew up in small town BC, Vernon, BC, in the 70s and the 80s. And of course, the stigma that was around mental illness was a lot more severe back then. There was no internet, there was no role models that, no actors at that point or sports celebrities had come forth acknowledging mental health challenges and such. And so I really spent an exorbitant amount of intellectual and emotional energy going through high school, going through my informative years hiding, and still did in my 20s and in my 30s, with only my immediate family members and closest friends knowing what I was dealing with. And then in a manic episode I had, let me backtrack a little bit. I grew up in a family of cyclists. My mom and dad would take my brother and I on trips around BC on bikes. We once toured part of Europe on bikes. So the idea of biking long distances for travel, that comes from them. As a BC boy, I watched Terry Fox and then later Rick Hansen use a spectacle, a dog and pony show to really get the media's attention and then draw awareness to a cause. And that really appealed to me. In particular, this notion with Rick Hansen and Terry Fox that though they had a disability, they were still very much men, were still very much strong, and they still had something to offer to society. So part of the idea of cycling around the world for the Canadian Mental Health Association with a campaign called Ride Don't Hide came from the forefathers of this sort of idea, Terry Fox and Rick Hansen. And in a manic spell, while at UBC doing my studies, that sort of congealed for me. And then 14 years later, that was 1996, 14 years later, I finally had the courage to put that in action in 2010. Met the right woman, now the mother of our children, my wife, my life partner, who very much ran it as a grassroots organization from the corner of her desk while working full-time at Langara College. CMHA endorsed it. I left on a bicycle from Vancouver, cycled through 33 countries over 16 months, did the equatorial distance of 40,000 kilometers. But where I was really successful is I was able to leverage my credentials as a teacher, added a level of professionalism to it, level my credentials as a part-time journalist, got all my media buddies on board, people like yourself, and really wrote a column every 2 weeks for a popular Vancouver newspaper while I was on the road. And that kept the ride alive. Came back to Vancouver in, I think it was November the 12th, 2011, finishing the ride to, 200-300 cyclists cycling with me on that rainy day into Rogers Arena. And it really, it culminated the global ride. But the Canadian Mental Health Association had the wisdom to immediately take that and turn it into an annual event. Mm-hmm. And so June of 2012, we had our first annual Ride Don't Hide. There were just 2 cities that participated in British Columbia. And over the past 6 years, we've grown to just this last June's 6th annual Ride Don't Hide that saw 30 cities across Canada, wow. 7,000 Canadians participating. $1.6 million raised on the day. It's Canada's largest bike ride in that sense, and certainly largest mental health awareness event. And it's basically an anti-stigma campaign. You have distances that are 5-10 kilometers long where you see people riding with their kids and their little BMX bikes. You have 100-kilometer rides that are very serious with let's say with the police escort through Vancouver. Mm-hmm. Altogether, you have all types of people on bicycles. In the sunshine, in the summer, no stigma there, no fear there, no misunderstanding there. People wearing little labels saying, I'm riding for myself, I'm riding for my brother, I'm riding for my sister, that kind of stuff. And I think it's the antithesis to fear and misunderstanding. I think it's the antithesis to stigma.
I was just curious, when you were doing your ride,
which sounds exhausting, by the way.
Which sounds, yeah.
when you were listing
just
up the
getting up and
miles, I'm
coming
like,
down.
oh my God.
But I was just curious, was there anything, as you're doing your stops and
Sure.
connecting with people, was there anything that surprised you or really resonated from the stories of the people along your journey?
Good question, and this was literally the fuel that kept me going because I was alone. The only part of the ride that was that I had company was car support across Canada at the end. It was either through our Facebook page or the website or in person. People kept on saying it's about time. People kept on disclosing these very private stories. You could tell that these people had secrets and that they had not shared with anyone and were very private about. But I guess I'd become a little bit of a lightning rod, a safe place, and they were writing me emails or they were saying to me in person in whatever country I was visiting, they were disclosing their stories. And you could see how visibly emotional it was for them that they had an opportunity to share something that they had held secret. They had come out of hiding, so to speak. Right. So that definitely was the underlying theme that just kept on coming up over and over again. And this, people keep on saying, you gotta keep going. You gotta keep going. Don't stop, And that really was the fuel that kept me going.
That must have been a lot of pressure, though, too, to feel like, you've got a champion. I mean, it's an exhausting, mentally and physically exhausting journey, but yeah, I mean, it would fuel you. But I mean, did you feel immense pressure to that all these people needed you to be the voice?
Yes, yeah, it was, but it was. I don't think I could have done it without the pressure. Right. One of the reasons I needed the endorsement from the Canadian Mental Health Association before I left was it added legitimacy to this crazy dream that, like I said, literally came from a manic spell in 1996. It added credence. It added legitimacy to it. And knowing that I had this noble, there's CMHA celebrating their 100th anniversary next year, literally having this organization behind me couldn't allow me to stop. You pass a place, you're like, this is beautiful. I could hang out here for 2 weeks and just learn how to surf. It just wasn't an option, right? And it's those stories and CMHA's endorsement that really kept me going. I mean, I literally would have had to come back in a body bag or severely injured from a car accident. There was nothing that was going to stop me.
You mentioned, before when you were in high school and when you were in university, yes, and even into your 30s, that you
yes,
kind of kept this to yourself, that
yeah,
this was, very select few people knew what you were going through.
Yes.
And now anybody does. Like
right,
the world does. There's no hiding it anymore.
Right.
So can you compare what it was like to be living with mental illness when that small group knew,
right,
compared to now you're a teacher,
right?
The whole world knows. Like,
yeah,
what are those two experiences like?
You guys are asking great questions. I'm not sure I fully remember the Michael Schratter before Ride Don't Hide. I am so free and so confident in who I am fully, including my mental health challenges, and that didn't exist before. People have often asked me, what was the hardest part of the ride? Was it the mountains? Was it the hills? Was it the this? The hardest part of the ride was writing my first column, and it's 250,000 readers in Vancouver, and saying at the end of it, I'm Michael Schratter and I'm bipolar. I sat there by my laptop, shaking like a leaf, crying. My girlfriend, now wife, hugging me, saying, you can do this. I'm getting all emotional just thinking about it. The amount of fear, right? Having realized that you have a mental illness at, let's say, 13, and hiding that up until 2010 when I'm a 40-year-old man. I'm now 48. To let that go was just beyond cathartic. The chip on my shoulder was the size of a frickin' old growth tree. And to finally hit send that off to my editor-in-chief in the newspaper and realizing it's going to be in the newspaper tomorrow, I wept. But after that, the catharsis, the freedom, right? Now, at the same time, I'm not saying it's for everyone. Like, certainly them, airing your dirty laundry like I did is that's not what people do. But I have a strong union, the teachers union. There was no risk to my employment. There was no risk to my, me not being able to bring in a buck. We still live, unfortunately, in a world where there is still some stigma. And some people may rightly have kept this thing a secret because they may rightly feel. That said, listening to today's, keynote speakers and such at the conference, and you hear the Minister of the federal minister getting up there talking about her family's mental health challenges. You hear the CEO of CMHA getting up there. You hear, many sports celebrities and actresses now talking about it. Finally, this is coming to an end, the stigma, because the stigma dehumanizes it, and it took the empathy away. And the first part of healing, whether it's a physical or emotional affliction, is you have to feel empathy. You have to feel you're safe in the group.
Right.
You have to feel that you're going to get the pats on the backs and the reassurances that you're going to heal. And arguably, you could make the case that you were wiser up until recently in Canada, and certainly still in other parts of the world, that you would be better off to keep your mouth shut, that you might lose professional and social opportunities if you disclose. And that in itself is just so inhumane. It's literally beyond cruel.
Right.
So it's so good to see the stigma disappearing, and that's what Ride Don't Hide is about. It's an anti-stigma campaign.
So you talked about, when you were doing the ride, often people are looking for an opportunity to come forward and share.
Right.
And you provided that. Going back as a young Michael, like what could have happened in your life that, you say, you grew up without the internet. What could have changed for you to feel as a young man or someone in school,
right,
that I can talk about it? What do we need to do?
It's so important. As a teacher, I teach grade 5. We are finally in our education programs. That's becoming part of the education program. A little bit of mental health awareness. We're the front lines. Their teachers, quite often these mental health challenges start in youth. In fact, most of them. And just for a teacher to have the capacity to recognize a challenge and then the confidence to talk to the parents and say in such a way that, hey, I think your son or daughter is going through something here. And not have the parents react like, who the F are you to tell me that my kid's crazy, right? To have the parents react like you would if you say, hey, I think your kid broke their leg. Like you might want to take them to a doctor. So times are changing. That's so important. There's also with the internet, if you Google famous crazy people, right? Just the amount of shakers and movers in the Western canon that have dealt with a mental illness from not all, but predominant, more the it's not the exception here of the great poets and directors and musicians and philosophers and from Kennedy to Abraham Lincoln to Winston Churchill. These people are all people that dealt with mental health challenges. Johnny Depp's OCD, right? And Mel Gibson and Madonna, and the list is endless. And so today, you can, as a teacher, I can show this to kids. In Vernon, back in the 70s and 80s, a town of 30,000 with no internet. I unfortunately made the mistake when I knew I was dealing with some mental health challenges, which were on the Schratter side of the family, you distrusted the psychiatry profession. My parents came from Austria. It was all very Freudian, and my dad, a very bright physicist, was not going to have any time for that sort of stuff. So you didn't go and acknowledge it. It was a family secret. So I made the mistake at that time, at literally at age 13, of picking up the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was full of information from the 70s and the 60s, so it's completely outdated. But not having the mental capacity, emotional capacity to truly understand what I was reading in Encyclopedia Britannica. And I just went down a rabbit hole that I honestly didn't recover from for years. I just scared the crap out of me. Because there was no one to disclose to, and there were no other images of what a mental health challenge successful person. And here's the thing, the images that I was getting were so destructive. It was the Hollywoodization of mental illness. It was the slasher genre.
Insert horror movie here.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's and then as a part-time journalist, I'm embarrassed to say, if it bleeds, it leads. So again, the only time a person with a mental health challenge makes the news is some statistical outlier where something horrendous happens. Some guy goes postal, and so these were the images I was getting all growing up, and so. Darn rights I'm going to keep this a secret, and darn rights I'm going to expend a huge amount of my energy hiding. And this is in fact still happening today. I have a friend that's a pharmacist. He's got the only 24-hour Shoppers Drug Mart in Victoria. Guess who comes in at 3 a.m. to get their scripts filled? Doctors, lawyers, accountants getting their anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications filled, because they don't want the public that they're working in to see them. So they're coming in at 3 a.m. to get their antidepressant. Right? Like if 1 in 5 Canadians deal with a mental health challenge, that's roughly 7 million Canadians. Obviously, it would be a national tragedy if 7 million Canadians were dangerous and dysfunctional. So 99.999, God knows what percent of the people are hiding because of the the narrative is still being controlled by this negative storytelling machine.
Yep.
In your role as a teacher and you're like part-time
Journalist
and the leader of this ride, you could not be a more public person, I wouldn't think, than you are. And I wonder what your role as a teacher specifically, what's the reaction to parents and maybe students that grade 5 might be a little young for them to comprehend, kind of the mental health aspect, but they do grow up, they move into other grades, you might have a relationship with them. What is how are you received kind of by that?
So that was one of my greatest fears. And I disclosed to a principal who I was working with at the time, who's since become one of my greatest friends. She's retired now. She's like a matriarch to me. And she then put me in touch with one of the superintendents. So Ronnie Ross was that principal, and then retired Gary Fisher, one of the superintendents in the Vancouver School Board. And they were both so supportive. And for by and large, it's been very positive. I haven't met any parent that's stupid enough to maybe they're out there, but have said something to me in this regard that would be in any way negative. So usually it's, wow, you did something pretty amazing, for lack of a better word. And my son or daughter, I'm glad that they're in your class. And they quite often disclose either something about them or their family member. Teachers end up disclosing. There's conversations that are happening in staff rooms now and in schools that I just don't think existed a decade ago, or the Bell campaign, Let's Talk, to a certain degree, Ride Don't Hide, and all the other amazing your podcasts and the other podcasts. Stigma is it's a social disease, and it's eroding so fast. It's eroding so fast as people like yourself with your Mind Vines podcast are just chipping away at it, and suddenly, everyone is either directly or indirectly affected. So everyone has a story, and when it's suddenly become clear that it's safe to talk about it, it's eroding fast. Yeah. Well, so I've never had any negative feedback from colleagues or parents.
Well, that's great. And it's been great to hear your story. We really appreciate you taking time.
Pleasure's mine.
For us to get to know you a bit better, and I know I'm aware of your program, but it's nice to actually sit and talk to you about it and kind of unpeel the layers of being a teacher, journalist, and an advocate. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, head to ridedon'thide.com if you're interested. It'll be June the 24th, 2018. We are looking at about 40 rides across Canada. You don't have to be a professional cyclist. Come out with your friends, come out with your kids. It's just about not hiding.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I ran.
No, it's good.